South Korean leader boxed in as Trump threatens North Korea. Seoul, South Korea. He won the presidency promising a shift toward dialogue with North Korea. He argued that sanctions and pressure alone would never persuade the North to scrap its nuclear arsenal. And he pledged to say no to the Americans if necessary. But 6 months after South Korea's president, Moon Jae-in, returned the nation's liberals to power, his plans to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula have gone nowhere. President Trump has doubled down on sanctions in the standoff with the North, dismissed talks as a waste of time, stepped up military drills, and rattled the region with pugnacious threats. And he has barely disguised his disagreement with Mr. Moon, openly accusing South Korea, an ally of 67 years, of appeasement. Now, as Mr. Moon prepares to host Mr. Trump's first visit to South Korea, he finds himself caught in a bind, compelled by the White House and conservatives at home to support hardline policies that he once criticized and that many of his supporters warn are dragging their nation to the brink of war. Mr. Moon's engagement agenda has been thwarted as much by the North's defiant weapons tests as Mr. Trump's combative response. But South Korea is more accustomed to belligerence from Pyongyang than Washington, and there is widespread concern that Mr. Trump may make matters worse when he arrives next week. What South Koreans fear the most is, what if Trump says something provocative, like a military option against North Korea, said Ko Yoo-won, a professor of North Korean studies at Dongguk University in Seoul. Trump is unpredictable. Mira Rapp-Hooper, a scholar of Asia security issues at Yale Law School, said Mr. Moon has struggled to balance his agenda with a Trump strategy that simultaneously aggravates North Korea and threatens the alliance relationship with South Korea. Usually when you are in a heightened security situation, you would expect to see an alliance pull closer, she said. But it is very difficult to do in a world where Trump is threatening South Korea itself. There have been some signs of pushback by Mr. Moon. He reached a deal with China on Tuesday to end their dispute over the deployment of an American missile defense system, agreeing not to accept additional launchers from the United States. And in a speech Wednesday, he repeated his position that military action against the North shall not be taken without South Korea's consent, undermining the credibility of Mr. Trump's threats. During a visit by Defense Secretary Jim Mattis last week, South Korea also sought to take back operational control of its military forces in the event of a conflict, which would require overhauling procedures in place since the 1950s that put its troops under United States command if there is a war. But Mr. Moon also appears to have concluded that South Korea has little choice but to stand by the Trump administration and accept its status as the junior partner in the alliance, even while it has the most at stake. What we must realize, painfully, is that although this is a Korean Peninsula issue of greatest urgency for us, in reality, we have no power to resolve it, Mr. Moon said on July 11 of the nuclear standoff. We have no power to elicit an agreement. Scott Snyder, director of the Program on United States-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations, said that Mr. Moon has proved to be a pragmatist. And any South Korean pragmatist is going to look at options for achieving South Korea's security needs and immediately recognize that the U.S. security guarantee is central, he said. Some of Mr. Moon's supporters have questioned his leadership and accused him of betraying his principles by deferring to Mr. Trump and what they consider a reckless approach to the North. The conservative opposition, meanwhile, has seized on any deviation to accuse Mr. Moon of endangering the alliance with the United States. But Mr. Moon's approval ratings remain high, with many South Koreans instead faulting Mr. Trump for raising the risks of an accidental war and undercutting Mr. Moon's diplomatic initiative. Mr. Trump's hints of a preventive strike on North Korea have unnerved many South Koreans as much as, if not more than, the North's weapons tests. Many were shocked and furious in August when Senator Lindsey Graham quoted Mr. Trump minimizing the potential for casualties in a war by saying they would occur in South Korea, not the United States. Small groups of anti-American activists have since taken to the streets in Seoul, shouting "No Trump, no war," and calling him a mentally deranged U.S. dotard, a phrase used by North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, to condemn Mr. Trump after he threatened to totally destroy the North in September. South Koreans are frustrated that the United States has not allowed their country any